There's a lot of talk in Buddhism about training the mind, what it means to train the mind. We talk about slogans for training the mind. We talk about stages of training the mind training as a kind of curriculum, as a practice, mind training that comes from outside, mind training that comes from within as a kind of project. And I hear that some of these are remarkable practices, by the way. I hear that, and I have a little bit of a reaction, which I think you all are familiar with, which is that I always want to jump in and say, no, 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 no. We aren't doing that here. We aren't trying to convince ourselves of anything. We aren't insisting on any particular set of beliefs. We're taking this up, we're holding it, we're trying it, we're seeing how it feels in our hands, but we're not taking part in that kind of indoctrination or anything that might feel blind. And I stand by that, and at the same time, it seems worthwhile to pause and acknowledge that, in fact, Zen does take up mind training. There's absolutely an aspect of this practice that is intended to have a certain effect in the practitioner. And, it's difficult to find the language sometimes. We end up personifying Zen and saying, Zen wants you to do this, something like that. And I don't mean to do that. And I also, want to acknowledge that Zen has just evolved in all sorts of haphazard ways. And so certain things that look like they're by design may not always be by design. They may be a kind of accident of history. Even then, though, we can open up this box and we can imagine for a moment, if this were designed, if this were something that someone had constructed for a particular effect, for a particular outcome, what is that design and why? We can start by acknowledging that Zen and Buddhism generally has what we might call core beliefs about impermanence, about suffering, about interdependence. And we can, debate, or we can try to find the right language to say whether we're supposed to adopt these views or if we're supposed to just simply entertain them. But Buddhism rests on these things, and it works from an assumption that we also will find a foundation in these principal teachings, these basic ideas. It doesn't have to be much beyond that. Impermanence, suffering, interdependence. That these three things inform everything else. And therefore, for everything else to be true, these things must be on some level true. We don't have to believe them. But we can also notice that they're holding the system up. So if we take one of those out, we might find we don't have much left to hold. And then, of course, there's this other practice, this rather remarkable practice, and you feel it more deeply if you're in a monastic setting or a retreat setting, where you're chanting things over and over and over again. So, of course, there's an assumption that if we say these things long enough, we're going to internalize them somehow. If we say that form is emptiness and emptiness is form enough times, and in the course of a monastic day, you might chant it. You might chant the Heart Sutra 7 times. 7 times a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, of saying these same things over and over and over again. Again, with some working assumption that you won't say it with a lot of resistance to it, that you'll let it seep in. That's interesting. We get to be aware of that. We get to notice that. We get to decide what we think about that. But the reason that I wanted to talk about this today, the thing that got me excited about it, was I listened to a podcast. It was the Huberman Lab, and he was talking with a neuroscientist named Wendy Suzuki. And Suzuki was talking about the relationship between the body and the mind. And the example that she gave was that a few years ago, she got really caught up in this and eventually became an instructor for this fitness system I'd never heard of called Intensati. And what she described was that she went and she watched it the first time and just rolled her eyes, because what she saw was people like punching. And as they were punching, they were saying things like, "I am strong now." It's kind of affirmations. And she's like, give me a break, right? Well, that's ridiculous. A, that's not how you feel that way. And B, there's no dignity in that. But some sort of circumstance she found her way back to this, watching it again. And she tried it. And when she tried it, she found that everything she was saying felt powerfully true in that practice. As she was kicking, as she was punching, as she was jumping around, she was saying these things that she was being told to say, things that you would want to believe about yourself, about your own power, about your own capacity, about your own will. She was saying them, and they were sinking in a different way. And so she goes on to talk about how what scientists actually know and can talk about in some with some nuance is that when we say things and match them with physical movements, there's a reinforcing quality to that. It changes the way we believe it because our body is believing it. Our body is holding it in some way. So if you're saying, "I'm strong now," that's very different from punching and saying, "I am strong now." Something is sinking in. You're opening a door so that it can get deeper inside. And I got so excited when I heard about this, because immediately I go over everything I've been taught, all the training I've ever done, all the bowing and the chanting and everything. And what I noticed was, again, if we think of Zen as something designed, then Zen understood this about the body and the mind centuries ago. But B, that Zen then draws a distinction between what must be internalized and what's optional. When we chant the Heart Sutra, and many of you have chanted the Heart Sutra with all of us in person on Quinpool and Spring Garden, when we chant the Heart Sutra, we just sit there. We don't do this. We don't bow. We don't take any particular physical posture. We're chanting philosophy. So there's an opportunity for it to sink in, but we're not taking any extra measures to make it sink in. We're not making any gestures that say, this is crucial. So form is emptiness and emptiness is form. It rolls around and it comes in, and you kind of get to do what you want with that. But there are other things that we do, whether we're doing it here in this community or again in a monastic setting, that are framed very differently. And we can look first to the service we just did. Right? We do the whole thing like this. Not because I'm making this up, but because this is how the tradition is doing it. So when all of my past and harmful karma, born from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion through body, speech, and mind, and then we bow. And as we bow, we say, I now fully avow. We embody that promise, that intention. We make that real. so that we make a connection between the act of bowing and the act of repentance. When our body moves a particular way, a certain set of beliefs, not about the world, but about ourselves, about what we're capable of doing, floats to the surface. And then we do it again when we take refuge in Buddha and in Dharma and in Sangha, and we bow. Right? These are actions. They're not philosophical notions. They're not about the nature of reality or about the nature of opposites. I'm saying, I take refuge. And when I take refuge, I'm going to do it with my body. When I vow to save all beings, I do it like this. So that these gestures of putting our hands together or putting our foreheads on the floor mean all of the things that we say when we do that. This is really, really simple. And it's obvious, and we don't need a neuroscientist to explain it to us to understand it. Intuitively, we understand it. But I also want us to notice it. That every time our forehead touches the ground, in a way, we're convincing ourselves of something. And we're allowing the tradition to convince us of something. You get to decide if that's good or bad. But it's powerful and it works. When we eat, and we bow, and we hold our food up to the world, when we offer that to all beings, and we say, there are all sorts of verses we might say there, but that have to do with giving this up. In a sense, because of the way our bodies are talking to our minds, we're saying, I believe that I can do this. And you can feel the difference. You can feel the difference if you look at your food and you say, I offer this food to all beings. That's a beautiful thing to think. But it's different from saying, I offer this to all beings. One of the criticisms that I heard a lot about monastic practice, because it was intense, was that it has so many parallels with military training, with brainwashing, right? You don't let people get enough sleep, right? You have very strict vertical relationships that are considered sacrosanct. There are punishments if you step out of line in any way. Right? The group is held up as the most important thing, and so you're told all the time to sacrifice yourself to the kind of synchronization, the movement of the flock. And when we frame it that way, it can sound like you're giving up a lot, and it can sound like there's a system in place that is intended to break your mind down. And I guess while there's a way to push back against that and to say, no, it isn't like that, it's different. I want to take today to say, yeah, no, it is just like that. It's just like that. That the way this practice works is that it does break our mind down. And what it breaks down is resistance to the idea that what we're saying is false. And that it has supporting systems in place involving the body, involving form, that work to convince us that what we're saying is, if not true, possibly true. And if not possibly true, just possible. And so if we want to feel that, if we want to feel that sense of possibility in the practice, we can choose to do that. And we can choose to do that by leaning into this, by noticing how this works and choosing to let it do what it does. It doesn't have to be a trick. It can be something that we select, something we put trust in, because there's an outcome that we want. And in the same way, we can notice this, and if this does not work for us, if it feels uncomfortable to us, we can choose not to do it. We say, I don't want this to work on me in that way. I want to stand back. I want to observe it longer. Think about it more. I want to let these ideas be ideas before I let them become something else. Something that I'm breathing, something that I'm holding, something that's holding me. So I offer that up today. That in a sense, this tradition is trying to convince you of something. And you should know that. As a practitioner, you should know that. You should notice that. And you should decide if you're comfortable with that. And if you are, you should know that there are ways to deepen that. And that they've always been right there in front of you. Literally in your hands. I'll stop there.